So when I was a teenager in high school, I worked for a volunteer fire department. And I think this really had a way of shaping, my childhood basically, because I saw quite a few fatalities. And I have never had I had one speeding ticket. I had two speeding tickets. One when I was 16, which was BS, and another one when I was 21, which was BS too. Both of them were in small towns. One was in a town called Prattville, Alabama, where this like 12-year-old on a cop motorcycle pulled me over going downhill, you know, gave me a ticket for like going 7 over or something like that. And then another one in a little town called Millbrook, which is just a speed trap town anyway. So I don't really count those. But for the most part, I've had no speeding tickets, no arrests, no moving violations, no parking tickets, and I owe a lot of that, I believe, to my time as a volunteer firefighter. And when I was in high school, I really enjoyed this. It gave me a sense of purpose and, um, you know, just a lot of friendships and camaraderie. But I also saw a lot of crazy stuff. And it was a volunteer fire department in a really small town, even smaller than the one I was from, kind of an unincorporated area out in the county. But it had a major highway running through it, and a lot of traffic accidents and things like that happened on that road. And one that really stuck out, my very first fatality, was this older couple in a Cadillac on that major highway pulled out in front of a truck that was loaded with trees, timber. And those things are extremely heavy, and you can't stop. And this couple pulled out in front of it and got hit, sideswiped. And so it got paged out as possible, a traffic accident with two fatalities, two possible fatalities. We always had to say possible because you never know. And we weren't allowed to declare them deceased anyways. But it got paged out, and this was my very first fatality that I responded to. And, I was curious, but I was like 17, and I didn't really want to see that. Or, the first one is odd to look at. But anyways, I pulled up to it, and they confirmed that it was a fatality. So we were basically just waiting on the medical examiner's office to come out and collect them. And they had a sheet over the Cadillac, and I didn't want to go and see it. But my chief came over to me, and he's like, "Hey," he's like, "this will be a good learning experience for you." And he's like, "If you're going to be a firefighter, you're going to have to see this kind of stuff." And he's like, "I promise you, it is not bad at all." And he said, "In fact, it's kind of sweet." And I was like, "What?" And I got kind of curious then. He's like, "Yeah, why don't you come and take a look?" So I reluctantly did. I walked up. The Cadillac really wasn't all that damaged. It hit the driver's side, and there was an older gentleman driving, and his apparent wife, older wife, next to him. And there was a sheet over the window, so I couldn't see in. So he's like, "Just peel the sheet back." He's like, "I promise, it's not bad." And I did. I pulled it back, and you could not tell that they were passed. They just looked like they were asleep. Now, the man was driving, and he pulled out in front of this logging truck. And I can only imagine that he pulled out and looked over and saw that logging truck and knew it was over. And they ended up with his arms wrapped around his wife, and their heads were touching. No blood, nothing gross. Um, the woman could have passed as a heart attack or internal injuries or whatever. And the man had the tire, the big front tire of the 18-wheeler, on his lap, so you couldn't see his legs. But there was no blood, no nothing. It was just them two in an embrace, or the man had his arms wrapped around her. So you could tell that he had pulled out, looked over, and knew that it was the end. And he reached over and grabbed his wife. And for being my very first fatality, it was really kind of sweet. And I'm glad that my chief made me go and take a look at that. Another fatality I worked was a traffic accident, and there were 3 deceased people in it, and it was a gruesome scene. And I'm not going to go into any detail, but it was gruesome. And this one was around Halloween, and at my school, I was still in high school. I was in charge, one of the people in charge of putting together a haunted hayride for the school. People would come and buy tickets, and it was a fundraiser for our senior trip to go to the Bahamas. And we sold tickets to the hayride, and that was going to help us pay for the senior trip. So it was around Halloween time, get paged out to this car wreck, and it was a bad one. And by this time I had seen several of them, and I didn't really mind looking at them, but I didn't want to touch any of them. I mean, I was a kid. And but I think all of these fatalities and situations contributed to me not being a speeder and not driving dangerously. And I think that's what's led to me not being in a bad accident or getting speeding tickets. But this scene was pretty bad, and they were pretty messed up. So I was out there waiting for there's a bunch of us, it wasn't just me, but we were out there waiting for the medical examiner to come. And this medical examiner, she was a tiny little lady, very prissy, very petite, very female. And it was just kind of odd that she was a medical examiner, but hey, somebody's got to do it. And she was real sweet and real cool, but she was very down to business when it came to this stuff. And so she showed up, and she was out taking pictures. And she, this was back in what, 95? So we're still using Polaroids back then. And she was snapping pictures and handing them to me. Well, she had some of them, but it was too many for her to carry, and she was handing some of them to me. And I was doing stuff and like moving, like getting chains ready to put on the car so we could drag it out of the woods. It was sitting just inside of the wood line off of a county road. And so I was busy, I was trying to get stuff ready, and her job was to extract the victims and take them to the medical examiner office. But she was handing me some of these pictures, and I was stuck putting them down in the turnout pockets of my pants. And it's not hectic, but it's a disaster scene basically with 3 fatalities. And so the medical examiner, she finished her pictures, and she's like, all right, well, let's get them out. And of course I didn't want to touch them, so other people were helping with that, and I was helping put the chains around the axles, and we were going to drag the car out to get it on the road for the tow truck. And so everyone was busy, and I got busy. The medical examiner was busy pulling the bodies out and everything. And one thing led to another, and it was the end of the scene. And I had those pictures in my pocket. And I forgot all about them, and I didn't give them back to the medical examiner. So everybody at the fire department knew that I was you know, the one that was working on getting the haunted hayride set up for the school. And you know, the my school wasn't too far from the fire department. It was all out in the rural county area, and so everybody kind of knew each other, and they knew that I went to that private school that wasn't too far away. But anyways, we got back to the fire station after everything is over and done. I take off my clothes, my turnout gear, and we have a short debrief, and that was it. Well, I had left my turnout gear at the fire station. I usually did, you know, that way if I got to the station, I could have them to put on to get on the fire truck. Because we didn't spend the night there. There was day rooms and beds and stuff, but you know, we rarely spent the night there. But I left my turnout gear over there. And this lady named Janet, she was so sweet. She was kind of like the mother of the fire department. And she grabbed my turnout gear, and it was real dirty, you know, and I don't think I had ever washed them at that point. But she grabbed them and she decided to wash them for me. And I came back through the fire station a couple hours later, you know, and I was going to grab my turnout gear and take them home with me because I was leaving for the weekend, and I live quite a distance away from the fire department. So Janet, she's like, hey, Jeremy, she's like, hey, I washed your turnout gear for you. She's like, it was nasty. And I was like, oh, I appreciate that. And she handed me these pictures back, and she's like, hey, I found these pictures from your haunted hayride scene. And she's like, hey, let me tell you something. That looks very realistic. I think you're really going to have a gem with that. She thought it was a scene from from the haunted hayride and that I had massacred these bodies and stuff, and that was going to be in the hayride. But little did she know, it was not. It was pictures from that accident scene, and those were real bodies. Not funny, but yeah. I don't think I ever told her that those were real pictures, but I took those pictures down to the medical examiner's office and explained to her what happened. But whew, if it wasn't Halloween time, I could have scarred that lady for life. So this next one was something else. You know, most people don't want to hear the gory details about car wrecks and fires and stuff like that, but there are some people out there that do. And I was working with this one guy, and had nothing to do with the fire department. I worked for a janitorial service at the time when I was in high school, and I was working with this guy, and he's like, hey, you're the guy that was at the firefighter fundraiser, right? And I was like, yeah, I'm a volunteer firefighter there. And he's like, oh, that's so cool. He's like, my family's from that area. And we're sitting around talking, and he's like, you got to tell me the juiciest story you got. I want to hear all the gross details. And he's like, I love a good horror story. I was like, okay, you know, if you ask for it, I'm going to give it to you. And I had worked this one car wreck that was really bad. And I'm not going to describe it, but it was bad. It was a single vehicle accident where this lady hit a tree. And we get there, and she was still alive somehow. I don't know how. Barely. I mean, she wasn't conscious, you know. I don't think she was actually there, but she still had a pulse, we'll put it that way. But it faded not long after we got there, and she did pass away, and they did declare her there at the scene. But she was driving, it was at night, kind of bad weather, and she was driving a blue Bronco, and she ran off the road and she hit a tree. Now, in the back seat, there was beer cans everywhere, open, empty beer cans. They just flew all over the inside of the vehicle when she had the wreck. And she was pretty messed up. So this man, he's like, hey, I want to hear your juiciest, grossest story you got. Lay it on me. And I mean, I told him every detail, every gruesome, gory detail. and he's just eating it up. He's like, oh man, this is so great. And he's like, oh, he's like, that's a good story. He's like, that was really good. And he's like, it reminds me, he's like, my mother, she passed away in a car wreck, not too far from where you were talking about, out in your district. She's like, you may have even worked her fatality or her accident scene. And he's like, yeah, she passed away. She drove a blue Bronco. And I was like, oh crap. And he asked me, he's like, what kind of car was it in that accident? And I was like, it was a blue Bronco. I had just described every gory detail of his mother's passing. And I remember this was 30, 35 years ago, whatever it's been, 30 years ago. And I still remember the horror that came across his face. And I can only imagine what he felt like knowing. And I told him that, she still had a pulse when we got there. And we felt the engine of the car, and it was cold. So that means she sat there. I don't know how long it takes for a car engine to cool down, but I'm sure it takes a while. So she was alive for quite a while, after this car wreck, and all disfigured and mangled and everything. But I had described every gory detail of it, and it turned out to be his mother's death. Oh, I felt so terrible, and so did he. But hey, he asked for it. Now, what's the odds of that happening? I don't know, but I still think about that to this day, and just am very sorry about it, the whole thing. Now, this next one was kind of sad, but we got paged out to this single vehicle car accident in a residential neighborhood. Now, out in the rural county, it was residential, but the houses still had some land, maybe a couple acres each, with long winding roads, so it was a residential area, but it still had, pretty good distance in between houses. But still, it was an odd place. It said that it was a single vehicle accident, with the possible fatality. And we were confused. We got in the fire truck and we're on the way. And we were confused. We're like, how could there be a bad accident in a neighborhood like this? But we get to the scene, and sure enough, there is this guy. And we all knew him. I mean, I didn't know him well, but I knew of him. And it was kind of a riches to rags story. Something happened. So the car that he was in was like this 57 Chevy. Beautiful car. Completely redone. He had put a lot of money and love into that car, getting it ready. But something happened and he went bankrupt. I don't know any details about it. But we go to this accident scene. His car is upside down. The engine to this car is laying like out of the like off the side of the road. And he is pinned underneath the windshield. The windshield had popped out, and he was laying down and pinned under the windshield. And we're thinking, how in the world did this happen? The speed limit's like 25 miles per hour. And this wreck was bad. I mean, his car was flipped over. The engine had fallen out. He had gone through the windshield. He had hit an embankment, and it caused the car to flip. And yeah, that's how he ended up. Well, we go over to him, and I was just a junior firefighter, but we had paramedics and stuff, and they go over and realize he's still alive. And now this guy, it was a riches to rags story, because like I said, he lost all his money and he had gone bankrupt. Some of the firefighters in the department were putting together a fundraiser to kind of help him out, because he had a big house and didn't have any money left. And but that was beside the point. We wanted to help him after this car wreck. We're confused. We're like, we don't know how this happened at 25 mile an hour speed limit. Here he is, half dead, But they realize he's still alive, so the paramedics go to work on him. And I'm telling you, it takes probably 30 minutes to get him stable enough to get him into the ambulance and on the way to the hospital. But he was alive. And they rush him to the hospital, and we kind of know this guy, and a lot of the people in the adults in the fire department really knew him well and were friends with him. And he was one that always helped the fire department. The volunteer fire department survives on very little tax money, and it's, we had fundraisers throughout the year, and we fill the boot. We would go out on the street corner and fill the boot. We would go to the county fair and set up a booth there and ask for donations. So we really survived on donations, and this guy was a big help in that. Over the years, he had donated quite a bit of money, and so everybody loved him. He was a really sweet guy. And but anyways, we got him to the hospital, and several months went by, and he got better. And the doctors put him back together, and he got released from the hospital. And some of our firefighters were going to visit him and take him food and stuff, and he was doing really well. Well, a few months go by, and we're all sitting around the day room just kind of talking and everything, and the mail comes to the fire station. So I go out and check the mailbox and bring the mail back in, and our chief was there, and there was a card, a letter from this guy. And so we're like, oh, that's sweet, he sent us a thank you note. So I handed it to the chief so he could open it, and he opened it up and started reading it, and it was a thank you note from this man that was in this car wreck. And he's like, I just want to tell you how grateful I am and thankful that you guys spent so much time and effort getting me into the ambulance and getting me to the hospital. And I just want to thank everybody at the hospital, and I want to thank all of you people for bringing me food and everything. And we still didn't know what caused this wreck. It was a bad wreck, but I don't think any of us ever found out what actually happened. And with it being in the rural county, they didn't do any investigating really, I think our county had like 4 deputies on duty at night, so it wasn't like some major traffic investigation going on. And there was no property damage other than his car. So it really wasn't investigated. But it was just this really sweet thank you card, really pretty thank you card. And he was just thanking everybody, and it was real sweet. But down towards the end of it, he says, but that car accident was supposed to take my life. I was trying to end my life. And he said, I don't want any of you to feel bad. And I gratefully thank all of you. But my goal was to end my life. And that kind of explained how there was such a horrible traffic accident in a neighborhood, with a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. And he's like, I love you all, but by the time you read this, I'm going to be gone. And Rusty was reading it, and he's like, oh my God. He called 911 and said, page us out and get deputies en route. We were going to go do a welfare check on him. We get in the medical truck and race to his house. And sure enough, the door's unlocked, and we walk in, and he had shot himself and passed away. Just so sad. You never know what people are going through, even though they might put on a smile face, and look happy. You just never know what's going on in somebody's life. And this has just really stuck with me. And I always try to be kind to people, because you never know what's going on in the background. And something you say, may tip them over the edge, or may push them towards peace. And you just never know. Life is precious. And it was a very sad thing. We all went to his funeral, but he had lost all his money, and he just didn't see a way out. He didn't want to live broke, And so even though we put all that effort into it, he was very thankful and very grateful. and let us know that. But it did have a sad ending. Now let's leave it on a funny note. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And like I said, I lived on the I didn't actually live in the fire district. I lived outside of it. But there was this, we got paged out to this car wreck, and it was a single vehicle car wreck, a pickup truck with multiple fatalities. And I was just like, and the location of the accident was like right there. It was on the very edge of the fire district, and I knew I was going to be the first to get there because I was coming from my house, and it was like right there on the edge of the fire district. And I just knew I was going to be the first one there, and I didn't want to be the first one there because, you know, a single vehicle accident with multiple fatalities. And they said it was a pickup truck, like an Isuzu Pup, I think is what they said, which I knew was a very tiny pickup truck. And I'm like, how are there multiple fatalities in a pickup truck? So anyways, I get dressed and I head out there, turn my lights and sirens on, and well, I didn't have a siren, but I had lights. And I knew I was going to be the first one there. Sure enough, I mean, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. This is on that major highway that goes through the district. And I don't see any flashing lights or anything, so I know I'm the first one there. And as I'm getting closer, my headlights start hitting the truck. And, you know, I'm still a quarter mile away or whatever. And I see the truck upside down, and I stop, you know, several hundred yards from the truck because I did not want to see this. You know, if it was multiple fatalities, you know, and it had gotten called in that way by a passerby. So there were no cops there, no sheriffs, and I was the very first one there. And I look across, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, my headlights are shining across it. I see the truck, it's upside down, and I start walking towards it with only my headlights shining on it. And I start seeing torsos and heads and legs and arms just all over the highway. And I'm like, nope, that's it. I'm done. I can't do this. You know? So I turn around and walk back to my car, and I'm like, I can't do this. And I see one of my friends' trucks coming up from the other direction, coming up north. I was heading south. And he parks his truck about the same distance my car was, but on the other side of the accident scene. And he starts walking towards me through the middle of all of this chaos. And he's just laughing. And he's like walking past the bodies, you know, the torsos, heads and arms and legs and everything. And he is just laughing his butt off. And I'm like, and he was about my age too. He may have been a year older than me, but he was still in high school too. And he's just laughing, and I'm like, all right, this dude's lost it. It's like, this is the scene that made him lose his marbles. He's done. And he gets up to me and he's like, hey, come look, come, you gotta see this. I'm like, dude, I do not want to see that. He's like, no, for real, come and look. So I reluctantly start walking with him up towards the scene, and I get closer and closer and closer. And they all look naked. It turned out this dude, there was one person in the car who was fine. He was sitting on the side of the road, but he was carrying a truck bed full of mannequins. And he swerved and flipped his truck over, and those mannequins scattered everywhere and broke apart. So that was what all of the body parts were. It was all these mannequins, torsos, arms, legs, hands, everything scattered across the highway. But everybody was fine. There was no fatalities. We patched the dude up and took him to the hospital, and it turned out okay. But man, I'm telling you, I thought that was going to be the end for me.